right, good evening, fellas. You guys want to go ahead and find a seat? We'll go ahead and get started. If you haven't heard or seen it yet, there is coffee in the back. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then we'll get started into Ecclesiastes again. All right? Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for the time to be together. I know that it's cold outside, but thank you that we can get here safely, and pray that you bring us home safely as well. Pray that you bless the time together as we open up your word, as we open up our lives to each other, that you would help us to reflect your glory, help us reflect on what it means to be wise in this life under the sun that doesn't often act like the way we think it should, the way we want it to, or even the way that you originally intended it to be. Father, pray that you'd give us wisdom and discernment as we think through these things and apply them to our lives. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I want to do a quick review of recent history. So I wasn't there to live in these decades. Some of you were. So I bet you could add plenty of things to the list. But just talking about a few decades and some trends that were the case in those decades. Again, there's plenty of other things that were happening, but just some overall themes and philosophies and what marked the decades and how they come back again in cycles. So back in the 1950s, okay, you're up and running after World War II, and capitalism and materialism are booming, right? The economy is booming. Supplies are booming. Materials are booming. The availability for consumer goods is unlike anything in the past. Now, more things are available to more people at a quicker pace than ever has been before the 1950s. You get new cars, you get suburban houses, and people start finding security in what's available because of the resources that are available and some security in a strong economy. Then, what happens in the 1960s? Well, sometimes they're looking back, not everybody, but some were looking back and saying, hey, the materialism and the capitalism didn't necessarily deliver on what we thought it was going to deliver. We're kind of dissatisfied by what we thought it would bring. So we jump into drug culture and some Eastern mysticism. Yay. Okay, in case you haven't noticed, that's also popular again now. Because what are they looking for? Well, hey, let's find new planes of existence to live on. Maybe we'll find some answers there. That's our search. So, quick little story about the Beatles. Sorry if they're your favorite band, okay? But the Beatles, going on a trip halfway across the world with a spiritual guru to gain some enlightenment. They're looking for other planes and other realities through transcendental meditation. They have a falling out with that guru who, isn't necessarily a holy man, okay? And maybe he's even jealous of what popularity they have, okay? They have a falling out, and it doesn't bring what they thought it would bring, but maybe a little bit of the Lucy in the Sky Like Diamonds can do that for them, okay? The 1970s, well, people are still searching, right? Maybe what happened in the 60s didn't bring it. The stuff in the 60s continues to trend through the 70s. There are people who are really searching still, but sometimes there's some resignation. All right, we're just going to have to give up. And then into the 1980s, the 80s are a lot of excess, okay? So what happens after those 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s? You start recycling some of those same things again, don't you? So people that are younger than my age would be like, oh, hey, check out this new thing. We're going to meditate. Now popular commercials are there. Super Bowl commercials about how do I go beyond? How do I go beyond this lowly life that's here? I must reach some new plane. And mix them with various other things. Drugs are still popular, obviously. Okay, they have been since they were invented and continue to be used. Trying to fill new voids that show up in new ways because people have more access to belief systems that used to be far away, oceans away. But now with globalism, you have access to those religious systems, those types of governments, those types of belief systems. People are still searching for something in the finite. They're still looking within this finite world to bring them something that satisfies. Maybe you could get to another plane, okay? The other plane kind of exists still up here. It's still inside the finite. All these finite things are reference points. And what is often happening? As people counsel other people, they're sharing their ignorance. If you have nothing beyond the finite as an infinite reference point to draw from, we're just all sharing our good opinions with each other. Hey, my opinion, your opinion, and who knows which one matters more. If you have nothing beyond that, you still need something beyond that speaks into the finite to give it value and wisdom and knowledge. So an infinite reference point like God. No, you're not the infinite reference point. You're not a God. Again, a popular trend nowadays. So that's a search of recent history, still a search now. There's nothing new under the sun. But here in Ecclesiastes, the writer, remember what we called him last week? We called him Kohelet. He's on a different search in chapter 1. His search is different because he has wisdom that's going to guide his analysis and his reflection. He has resources available to him that we don't. Like he's got vast wealth, vast influence as a king. He's got women, he's got power, he's got all of these things that really give his search some validity because he can look through all of these things and say, what is the value, what is the benefit, and what is the assessment of them? He believes in God, but he also acknowledges that God has some mysterious things that belong to him and him alone. And yet he still wants to say, this thing that is under the sun, wisdom, folly, work, indulgence, what's the value of these things? What can we say about them? How can we go about them? So he's going to go through his search, and hopefully you'll see that it's very different than the searches of recent decades, and a search that still has been holding sway as part of the scriptures for the last 3,000 years. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into Ecclesiastes 1, starting there in verse 12 down to verse 18. Here's what Kohelet has to say about his search. I, the teacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. I decided to carefully and thoroughly examine all that has been accomplished on earth. I concluded, God has given people a burdensome task that keeps them occupied. I reflected on everything that is accomplished by man on earth, and I concluded, everything he has accomplished is futile, like chasing the wind. What is bent cannot be straightened. What is missing cannot be counted. I thought to myself, I have become much wiser than any of my predecessors who ruled over Jerusalem. I've acquired much wisdom and knowledge. So I decided to discern the benefit of wisdom and knowledge over foolish behavior and ideas. However, I concluded that even this endeavor is like trying to chase the wind. For with great wisdom comes great frustration. Whoever increases his knowledge merely increases his heartache. Down through the end of chapter 1 there. So I read a translation that you might not have there in verse 13. I concluded God has given people a task, a grievous task, or a heavy burden that occupies them. He's saying it's grievous, it's heavy, it's there. It's your toil. Because what happens? Back in Genesis 3, our toil does not yield the fruit that it is meant to, right? That's part of the curse. And he's saying it's keeping you occupied. Now, what you do with that occupation is another thing. But he's just making the observation that here is a thing that God has given to man, and it keeps them occupied. And he has a lot of things to say about it as we'll continue to read through the rest of the couple of chapters here. Striving after the wind. I hope you saw that phrase. It's going to keep coming up over and over again. In verse 14, Everything he has accomplished is futile, like chasing after the wind. So, could you catch the wind? Did I just catch some wind? No, because I just squished it out, right? Can you catch the wind? Well, you can try. What do you get after you do all the work to try and catch the wind? Yeah. Not much. You're like, not much. You got some wind. You got some air. Woo. Cheers to you, right? Nothing. It's not substantial. It is a waste of your time necessarily and how we evaluate it. So, verse 15 is almost like a proverb. What is bent cannot be straightened. What is missing cannot be supplied. It's like a proverb that you read in the book of Proverbs, just a one-line statement. Some things are just the way they are, and they can't be changed. You can try as you might, but some things just are the way they are. And you could expect maybe that God's ways are inscrutable, and so you can't figure all of them out, but we want to try. We want to know. It's ingrained in us. We'll talk about that when we get to chapter 3. But some of these questions, some of these things that seem off, would be off without revelation from God to say this is how it was supposed to be, right? And I think you're catching the drift there down in verse 18. For with great wisdom comes great frustration. I keep searching. I keep wanting to know more about that. I need some infinite thing to speak into it because what I don't know, whoever increases his knowledge merely increases his heartache. For those of you who've got a few decades on your life, you probably realize that the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know more things. That you realize that your knowledge is limited. And you realize that there are some things I just can't fix it. Gosh, I wish I could fix all of this stuff in front of me. But it's outside of my hands or outside my ability to fix all of those things. The more I see the world in front of me, it pains me to see such heartache and so many issues and all this stuff. And it is outside of me to be able to fix it. Just because I grow in knowledge and wisdom doesn't necessarily mean I can grow in my ability to fix it. So he's going to continue his search, and he's going to address 3 things here, because we're going to go all the way through chapter 2. He's going to address indulgence, pleasure. He's going to address the value of wisdom and folly, and then he's going to look at the work we do, the toil we do. Okay? So let's look at what he has to say here about his continued search, and now some assessments about some things that everybody deals with in this life under the sun. So in chapter 2, we'll go from verse 1 down to verse 11. So I thought to myself, come now, I will try self-indulgent pleasure to see if it's worthwhile. But I found that it is also futile. I said of partying, it is folly, and of self-indulgent pleasure, it accomplishes nothing. I thought deeply about the effects of indulging myself with wine. All the while my mind was guiding me with wisdom and the effects of behaving foolishly so that I might discover what is profitable for people to do on earth during the few days of their lives. Okay, short little paraphrase. I got drunk. I took notes about what was going on. Okay? I increased my possessions. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I designed royal gardens and parks for myself. I hope you're noticing a trend here. He's got a lot of things for himself. I constructed pools of water for myself to irrigate my grove of flourishing trees. I purchased male and female slaves, and I owned slaves who were born in my own house. I also possessed more livestock, both herds and flocks, than any of my predecessors in Jerusalem. I also amassed silver and gold for myself, as well as valuable treasures taken from kingdoms and provinces. I acquired male singers and female singers for myself, and what gives a man a sensual delight, a harem of beautiful concubines. So I was far wealthier than all my predecessors in Jerusalem, yet I maintained my objectivity. I did not restrain myself from getting whatever I wanted. I did not deny myself anything that would bring me pleasure. So all my accomplishments gave me joy. This was my reward for all my effort. Yet, when I reflected on everything I had accomplished and on all the effort that I had expended to accomplish it, I concluded, all these achievements and possessions are ultimately profitless, like chasing the wind. There is nothing gained from them on earth. So he gets drunk, he takes notes. He has an assessment of that. He acquires all of these things, he has an assessment of all of that. He does what is available, acquiring slaves, singers, various types of pleasure, a harem of women, hundreds of them, okay? Hundreds of them, also known as enough for 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, okay? That is a vast scope of what he's able to look at and have wisdom guiding him for his assessment about life, okay? Can he get on another plane? Can he find something substantial here on earth? So let's see, what does he have to say? He says that certain things are madness, right? He says, I said of partying is folly, and of self-indulgent pleasure it accomplishes nothing. Or some of your translations might say madness. It's just madness. Because what happens? If you live from one high to the next high to the next high, what do you get? You get an unsustainable cycle, right? Like, because the next thing has to be bigger. The next thing has to be bigger, right? If I ride this roller coaster, well, I keep getting it, and then after riding it a few times, I need a bigger one. I need a bigger one. I need a bigger one. And he does that. He gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And what does he have to say at the end? Well, he says an assessment that is kind of like startling. You mean to tell me that you went through all these pleasures and that's your assessment of them? So what does he say in his assessment? When I reflected on everything I had accomplished and on all the effort that I had expended, all these achievements and possessions are ultimately profitless, like chasing the wind. There's nothing gained from them on earth. Now, a couple of sentences before that, he says, I enjoyed this stuff. I enjoyed having big vineyards, okay, orchards, and so on and so forth. I did. I enjoyed it. It was nice to have it. So he has a value of it, but then he also assesses it. You can get some value out of it. You can enjoy it to a certain amount. But in the end, it's a cycle of what can I gain out of this? And he's saying, I can only gain so much. And that's where his wisdom comes into play. He recognizes that there is some good there, and some of it is even right from the hand of God that I could enjoy these things. But there is an end to them. Pleasure is not an end in itself. I think that's what he finds here. Okay? But what's our problem with this? We're not satisfied with this answer. I'll be honest. As a young man, there were plenty of people who told me, hey, don't go that way. You probably shouldn't go that way. But I'm not willing to listen. I want to try for myself. I need to know for myself, is that true? You could kind of cut your chances at heartache and so on and so forth if you were to yield to the wisdom that's here, right? But, like Proverbs 14:12, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is death. Ooh, that's harsh, but true. Oh, this seems great. I don't know where I'm going, but it seems great. Oh, dang, I found myself in a pit. Okay? It's hard to stay content with wisdom that's here. But he has done something we can't do. He's expanded his search beyond our parameters, and he has wisdom, and he says, this is the value of it. Good. It's nice. It's pleasurable. It was fun. But there's a limit. It is not an ultimate thing. So there's his assessment of indulgence. Let's look at how he compares and contrasts wisdom and folly in verse 12 down to 17. Next, I decided to consider wisdom as well as foolish behaviors and ideas. For what more can the king's successor do than the king has already done? I realize that wisdom is preferable to folly, just as light is preferable to darkness. The wise man can see where he's going, but the foot of the fool walks in darkness. Yet I also realize that the same fate happens to them both. So I thought to myself, the fate of the fool will happen even to me. Then, what did I gain by becoming so excessively wise? So I lamented myself. The benefits of wisdom are ultimately meaningless. For the wise man, like the fool, will not be remembered for very long, because in the days to come, both will already have been forgotten. Alas, the wise man dies just like the fool. So I loathe life, because what happens on earth seems awful to me. For all the benefits of wisdom are futile, like chasing the wind. So, should you be wise or should you be a fool? Well, that's not even an option to him, nor should it be an option to us. But he recognizes that there's limits, right? You can live wise, and maybe 2 or 3 generations after you will remember you. And that's it. All will perish. That's some perspective. Why have I been overly wise at saying, why do I have this thing? How come the way I live as being wise does not get rid of this great equalizer here of death? How come it doesn't cast it aside? Now, did I save myself from heartache? Did I save myself some other troubles along the way? Sure. But there's death still there. So what can I say about living wise? Will it do something for me beyond that? No, there's death there. Again, he's talking about life under the sun. He's not talking about eternal rewards that await the believer afterwards, where we hope to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant, right? Like, that's what I want to hear afterwards. But he's saying, can I say something now in this here and now when that is all, that's where everyone goes. Death is there for everyone. Well, it's kind of a sobering reminder to say, I want to live wise. The other is not a good option, but I also have to recognize the limits. I too will go to the grave. I too will go to the grave. There's some short benefit, okay? But there's always this ultimate thing looming out in front of us. Let's look at work. Let's look at work as we try to finish up this chapter here. Verse 18 to 25. So I loathe all the fruit of my effort, for which I work so hard on earth, because I must leave it behind in the hands of my successor. He's stored up, but he doesn't get to take it with him. Who knows if my successor will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will be master over all the fruit of my labor, for which I work so wisely on earth. That's futile. That's frustrating. I leave all my stuff to somebody after me. He might be an idiot. Okay? For a man may do his work with wisdom, knowledge, and skill. However, he must hand over the fruit of his labor as an inheritance to someone else who did not work for it. This also is futile and an awful injustice. What does a man acquire from all his labor and from the anxiety that accompanies his toil on earth? For all day long his work produces pain and frustration, and even at night his mind cannot relax. Anyone? Yeah, okay. Thought so. There's nothing better for people than to eat and drink and to find enjoyment in their work. And I also perceived that this ability to find enjoyment comes from God. For no one can eat and drink or experience joy apart from him. So he knows that he cannot prevent or dictate what comes after him. Because that's his reflection on, hey, after I'm gone, I cannot rebuke the person for how they treat my stuff. Ooh, I'll be gone. I can't do anything about it. So if I toil and toil and toil and toil and toil, and that's what my life ends up being about, you don't get to take it with you. You leave it also behind for who knows what. Maybe spoiled children and grandchildren. Heaven forbid, but it's a possibility, right? So does that cause you then to reflect back on what is there? What am I doing? Why am I doing all this? Okay, I'll leave that question as an open question for you guys to talk about in your groups. Last verse here in verse 26. For to the one who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy. But to the sinner, he gives the task of amassing wealth, only to give it to the one who pleases God. This task of the wicked is futile, like chasing the wind. Do you kind of see? He recognizes that there are certain things he can't know. There are certain things that come after death, but he also recognizes that God can work things around so that judgment is kind of coming in life. Because that judgment there is happening to the sinner to say, you're going to do all this stuff, but I'm going to work out circumstances that it will not bring what you want. You work all this, but I'm not going to necessarily allow you to enjoy it. Ooh, because you are a wicked man or woman. Because what is it? He says, for the one who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy. And he also gives him the ability to enjoy the work that's at his hands, the ability to enjoy the good gifts that God brings into his life, to which we can be thankful for as we walk in righteousness, as we walk with God, as we try to entrust our lives to him and his care, because he's the one orchestrating these things. So you've got his reflections on indulgence, wisdom and folly, and work. Now, let's not say too much, but let's not say too little about what he has to say. Because he's not saying stop working, be lazy, anything like that. He's just saying when you do it, if you make it an ultimately you're going to find it to be problematic. To make those things ultimate versus having balance and judicious enjoyment of things in this life. Okay? So you've got some open thoughts there about how he deals with these topics and then what it means for us to be wise, because you feel some of the same things he feels here. Maybe your assessments are different. Wrestle with it as you talk in your groups downstairs. So you guys can head downstairs. If you're new, flag me, and I'll point you to a group that you can get to know some guys and build relationships there. Okay?